Hello, everybody. We are at the penultimate panel. Not the last one, the one next to the last one. So if everyone can take their seats, we'll get underway. For those of you who don't know me, my name is William Alberk. I am the Director of Strategy, Technology, and Arms Control for the International Institute for Strategic Studies Europe office based in Berlin. I'm a former NATO official, former US government official. I started in this field working on safeguards in 1994 for a safeguards dictionary for what is now NNSA, and then worked on the MPCNA program, if you remember, all the way back when we were actually working with the Russians to try to safeguard their nuclear weapons and material. It seems like a long time ago. But this topic, I think, is really interesting. Implementing the European Union's non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. I had the pleasure when I was at NATO of following one of our previous speakers, Jacek Belica, as the head of NATO's WMD Center, Arms Control Disarmament Non-Proliferation Center. And the partnership that we built with the European Union, both personally by working with Jacek, because he used to also work at NATO, and then now with, before I left, up until I left, with Marilyn von Dielen. That relationship was really important because when I showed up at NATO in 2012, I felt like CERN should have studied the phenomena because the longest distance on Earth was the distance between NATO headquarters and the European Union headquarters. Just absolutely unbreachable space. And to break that is really emblematic of how important arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament has become in the years since 2012. And the fact that these kind of artificial splits that we create are not helpful, and the countries that share membership in NATO and the EU recognizing each other's strengths, and the countries that are members of one or the other recognizing the commonalities they have and the willingness and desire to work together. So today we're going to focus specifically on the European Union, on its strengths and weaknesses in non-proliferation and disarmament, and to try to really understand how we can focus energy working forward. IISS Europe is a member of the consortium. IISS was one of the founding members. I find this to be an incredibly useful relationship. And so one of our questions will also look at whether or not there are more efficient ways we can all work together, track 2 and track 1 together, pushing our common interests. So the panel today, we have Izumi Nakamitsu. She will be joining us from online. She is the United Nations Undersecretary General and the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs since 2017. I think if you make it to March, you'll be the longest serving person in this position ever, and an able representative of the United Nations. Then we have Heike Gerstbrein, the head of unit for the Common Foreign and Security Policy Operations, European Commission's Service for Foreign Policy Instruments. That is one heck of a business card. Then Stefan Tressing, the Deputy Head of Disarmament, Non-Proliferation, and Arms Export Control Division of the External Action Service. And finally, Sigurd Atchestrate, the Director of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation of the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'm going to turn to each for an opening statement. Then I'm going to ask each one of them a question, see how they answer it, let them comment on each other's answers, and then we'll turn it open to the floor. So in that order, I turn to Madam Nakamitsu. Can you please go ahead and address us here today? Thank you, Izumi.
Thank you, William. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. I wish I could be there in person. I understand that you're all gathered. I'm the only one participating by remote means. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you. William, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, my sincere appreciation goes to the Istituto Affari Internazionali on behalf of the EU consortium for convening this, I understand, 11th edition of this important conference. again, I promise if there is one next year, I will be there in person. The UN ODA is charged with, as you know, supporting member states in their disarmament and international security efforts, or means to collectively address strategic risks. And I think there are many strategic risks that we see today. From our standpoint, we are observing a shift towards a more turbulent and unstable future. The war in Ukraine, I'm sure you discussed this quite a lot during your sessions, is creating ripple effects that are shaking really the international system and exacerbating underlying tensions to an unprecedented level. And our world is definitely increasingly divided. Distrust is rapidly replacing dialogue, and we are witnessing openly antagonistic relations between nuclear armed states. And on top of that, obviously, global military spending hit an all-time high of 2.1 trillion US dollars last year, 2021. And factoring in the pledges to raise military budgets in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this figure is expected to rise sharply in the coming years, with disruptive implications on other priorities. Let's not forget, we also have climate emergency, healthcare recovery from COVID, gender equality, and of course the entire SDGs. I think it's important to put security concerns in the broader context as well. So against this global context, I would just very briefly highlight 5 factors that require our particular attention and necessitate our joint efforts to address them. First is obviously the intensifying challenge to global norms against the use and possession of weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear risk is the highest it has been in decades, raising the risk of mistake, miscalculation, and possible escalation. And of course, diminished trust, of course, means nuclear weapon states will be unwilling to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national security strategies. And then we see these trends, obviously. Increases in accuracy of nuclear-capable ballistic missiles have led to their greater use as tactical weapons in the battlefield with conventional warheads. The use of dual-capable missiles further increased the risk of miscalculation and misperception, especially in times of this kind of heightened tensions. And as at the same time, we are witnessing an unprecedented situation in which nuclear installations are directly affected by armed conflict, with potentially disastrous consequences. And other issues such as the future of the JCPOA, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula are also increasingly precarious. Now, for years, we relied on the NPT as the cornerstone instrument to protect our world from nuclear annihilation. In this regard, I wish to emphasize that we as the UNODA are definitely discouraged, but surely not defeated by the inability of the review conference to reach substantive outcome. Now, although far from perfect, the final document was supported by all states parties, except for one, of course, and contained commitments that can help reduce current risks and make progress in nuclear disarmament, including concrete risk reduction measures, enhanced transparency and accountability measures, and a commitment, of course, to pursue a successor framework to the New START treaty. We're glad to see that commitment of the EU states to the NPT was really fully on display during the review conference. I believe that EU states should now consider how they can collectively implement those commitments on a voluntary basis and how they can encourage other states parties to do so as well. As we already enter a new review cycle very soon in the beginning of the next year, the European Union, by virtue of its unique membership, consisting of nuclear weapon state, allied state, also including nuclear host countries and key TPNW supporters, it really is well positioned to help reduce nuclear risks while helping to get back on the path towards a world free of nuclear weapons. So there is a clear role for the European Union states to play in developing and helping to implement risk reduction measures such as transparency and confidence building measures. So this is a task that we as the UN would really like to support. Now, second, very quickly, the scourge of chemical weapons should have been consigned to history by now. But as we all know, last decade had witnessed their repeated use. This is also profoundly damaging disarmament and non-proliferation efforts. In addition, we are alarmed by the increasing rise of non-state actors capable of acquiring and possibly employing toxic chemicals for hostile purposes. In the sphere of chemical weapons, I continue to work closely with the Director General of the OPCW to ensure the implementation of Security Council 2118 on the elimination. Now, next year, the 5th Review Conference of States Parties to the Chemical Weapons will be an important milestone in the life of this treaty and provides an opportunity to strengthen the norm against chemical weapons and set a strategic direction for the OPCW for the next 5 years and beyond. And I would like to thank the European Union for its unwavering support to the CWC and to the work of the OPCW, as well as for, of course, supporting collective efforts to ensure accountability for the perpetrators of chemical attacks. Third, we are observing a dramatic evolution in biological threats. COVID-19 demonstrated the devastating global harm that can be caused by natural, accidental, or deliberate spread of infectious disease. It also highlighted continuing risk that non-state actors may seek to acquire weapons of mass destruction, their means of delivery, and related materials. International community has a key instrument in this area, and that is, of course, the Biological Weapons Convention. Today, we are just 2 weeks away from the 9th Review Conference of the BWC, which is the primary international framework for tackling the threat of biological warfare. Now, the 9th Review Conference of the BWC, which will take place next month, is a major opportunity to strengthen this key framework. I wish to express our appreciation to the European Union and its member states for being such a strong supporters of the BWC and their active engagement in efforts to strengthen biosafety and biosecurity around the world through the implementation and universalization of the BWC. I would also especially like to commend the EU's generous support to strengthen the BWC Implementation Support Unit, ISU, throughout these years. And I trust that EU and its member states will contribute to a successful outcome of the 9th Review Conference. Now, fourth, very quickly, cyber and outer space have become potential domains of conflict. And we see the design and acquisition of new weapon technologies with unclear or potentially dangerous applications, with implications for efforts to ensure the effective regulation of arms, non-proliferation, arms control, non-proliferation, as well as respect for humanitarian principles. Technologies are being repurposed to create new generations of conventional weapons with strategic capability. And rapid technological advancements often outpace the international governance and regulation, our efforts, making it hard to develop multilateral legal, normative, and policy frameworks to govern these technologies. And some of the new emerging technologies also coupled with nuclear command, control, and communication structures, posing new risks to international security and peace. So the bottom line is that these technologies give the perception of increased readiness to engage in conflict and reduce the barriers and cost to the military forces. I welcome the EU's efforts to strengthen international norms in cyberspace to ensure that cyberspace does not become a domain of conflict, tension, and escalation. I also urge the EU member states to pursue measures in reducing incentives to resort to malicious use of information and communication technologies. And given the civilian origin of most AI development, the dual use nature of technology, the risks of diversion and misuse, I also welcome the European Commission's proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, which will help to enhance and disseminate norms of responsible development and also use of AI. The UN also stands ready to intensify cooperation with the EU to respond to new developments in weapon technologies, notably with the CCW, within the CCW. We count on the European Union to continue its efforts to modernize existing arms control treaties so they adequately capture the nature of such new weapons technologies, systems, by furthering understanding on the required control, judgment, and involvement of human beings in relation to the use of weapon systems and other military applications with increasing integration of autonomy. And I was heartened that member states established the open-ended working group on reducing space threats as an inclusive process to develop new norms, rules, and principles. And I was also pleased that the mandate of this group provides for engagement with international organizations, commercial actors, industries, and civil society, whose knowledge and expertise can really make a valuable contribution. Now, finally, I want to turn quickly to small arms and light weapons. A consensus outcome document at the 8th biennial meeting of states on the program of action on small arms and light weapons in July 2022 has paved a positive way forward towards a successful REDCON 4. We are grateful for the active and positive role played by the European Union during this meeting. We are working to implement the outcomes, including the creation of a fellowship program and exploration of new issues for possible inclusion at REDCON 4. And in the field of small arms, progress in implementation requires national implementation to drive progress building on the Program of Action's normative framework. So we welcome the recent EU Council decision approving a multi-year UNODA project to support implementation, which will include holding regional consultations in the lead up to REDCON 4 and a sponsorship program to enhance broader participation at the meeting, as well as continued support and capacity building to member states, increased implementation and reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close. I have tried to highlight how we see the multiplicity of factors that create challenges for our non-proliferation and disarmament work, as well as how we can work jointly to address them. I must underscore that this requires working with a multiplicity of actors. And if we are to overcome the challenges posed by increasing strategic risk, we will need to call on actors from diverse array of fields and backgrounds, like yourselves, in peace and security, in public health, in industry, academia, and civil society. So this multi-stakeholder approach is a major commitment of the UN Secretary General, as emphasized in our Common Agenda report and his forthcoming new agenda for peace, including his call for a new vision for disarmament to guarantee human, national, and collective security. This new agenda for peace is an opportunity to consider how to build on the great gains in disarmament and non-proliferation and adopt measures to reduce risks in cyber and other emerging technologies. They could act as a vehicle for the revitalization of existing and development of new transparency and confidence building measures, which remain, I would say, underutilized. And it could seek to ensure that disarmament takes its rightful place as a pillar of the international peace and security architecture and as a key accelerator for achieving sustainable development. The complementarity between the European Union and the UN's agenda is grounded in our mutual conviction in and also commitment to a multilateral approach to disarmament and non-proliferation. I look forward to working together with the European Union to that end. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to our exchanges that will follow. Thank you. Back to you, William.
Thank you. Heike, do you want to come here or do you want to sit? How would you like to do this?
I can stay here.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'm very pleased to address you today at this very important event. But before I go into medias res, I would like to transmit greetings and apologies of our director, Peter Wagner, who is not able to attend due to a last-minute change in his schedule. I'm very, very happy to see many familiar faces, and I would like to thank the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium, as well as the Istituto Affari Internazionali, for organizing this conference and for inviting the Foreign Policy Instrument Service to speak today. I would be focusing on three key points. Firstly, I would like to say a little bit about Russia's role in undermining the global efforts on non-proliferation and disarmament. Secondly, I would also describe a little bit what the EU is doing in supporting Ukraine via all possible means that are at the EU's fingertips. And thirdly, I would once more like to reiterate the EU's support to the non-proliferation and disarmament multilateral treaty system and institutions. For 2 years now, the annual conference had to be organized in a virtual context due to the COVID pandemic. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to meet you all in person once more. But just as we thought that the crisis had started to wane, another crisis, even more destructive, struck when Russia invaded its neighbor, Ukraine. Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, and unjustifiable military aggression against Ukraine had also had a profound negative impact in the area of non-proliferation and disarmament. Immediately at the start of the war, Russia issued unprecedented nuclear threats using nuclear blackmail to shield a full-scale conventional invasion and continued threatening the world with the use of the most deadly weapon known to humankind. Concerning biological weapons, Russia used disinformation to justify its aggression. And with regard to all multilateral institutions, instruments, and regimes which underpin the international non-proliferation architecture, Russia intensified its efforts to disrupt, to block, and to spoil. Russia is solely responsible for the fact that the 10th Review Conference of the parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons ended without reaching agreement on the final outcome document. Now, before I elaborate on how the European Union supports Ukraine in the field of demining and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risks, please allow me to say a few words on our overall support to Ukraine. Since the start of the Russian invasion, the European Union has welcomed Ukrainian refugees and provided extensive financial and humanitarian assistance to the country. Also, as you all know, we have applied unprecedented sanctions against the country. And we have helped Ukraine to defend itself against the Russian aggression, including by the provision of lethal equipment through the European Peace Facility, a first and a very new instrument that enables the European Union to do exactly that. With regard to our support to non-proliferation and disarmament in particular, let me first talk about our support to demining in Ukraine. The Russian war of aggression has made Ukraine one of the most mine-contaminated countries in the world, with up to 13% of the territory contaminated. In response to this huge need for mine action, the European Union is scaling up its support significantly. The State Emergency Services of Ukraine and the NGO Halo Trust are carrying out the dangerous and laborious task of locating and defusing mines and unexploded ordnance. Our support to the equipment and work safety of these demining actors is crucial to eventually allow for the recovery of agricultural activity and the return of residents. We are also looking for ways to increase our support to mine action governance in Ukraine. Let me come to CBRN. As far as the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risks are concerned, we have an extensive and transparent cooperation with Ukraine and its neighbors in the framework of what we call the EU CBRN Centers of Excellence initiative. Within weeks after the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, we were able to provide critical CBRN detection and personal protection equipment to the Ukrainian border guards and Ministry of Health. In the near future, we are also preparing to reinforce our support to Ukraine in the field of protection of critical CBRN infrastructure of biosafety and biosecurity. Coming to nuclear security, Russia's military actions have compromised the safety of radiation sources and destroyed infrastructure at nuclear facilities. In this very context, we have just agreed with the IAEA to finance their expert missions to identify and assess the nuclear security needs of Ukraine. We are also looking into the provision of equipment needed for the security of nuclear material and facilities and of the radioactive material as such. Now, while I have focused my presentation on Ukraine so far, given the huge importance that this particular matter has, and given that it has been in the limelight and will be in the limelight for quite some time, please let me assure you that the EU will continue supporting the multilateral treaty system which provides the legal and normative basis for all non-proliferation efforts. We support the universalization and effective implementation of key treaties and conventions, including the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, and the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. Of course, we also support the work of the relevant institutions, including the UN, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the OPCW. This year, we have launched a new action to support the implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty, and we work with the United Nations on new action in support of the United Nations Programme of Action to Prevent, Combat and Eradicate the Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons. To conclude, I would like to underline that peace is at the heart of European integration since its very start more than 70 years ago. Therefore, against the background of nuclear threats and war in Europe, the European Union is fully committed to the multilateral treaty system and will continue to support the non-proliferation and disarmament norms at the global, regional, and national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pass the mic down, and Stefan, go ahead. Oh, you got it. Go right ahead. Start talking. Yep. They should turn it on remote. That's good.
Yeah, I think that works. So thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stefan Tressing. I'm the Deputy Head of Division at the Division for Non-Proliferation, Disarmament and Arms Export Control at the EAS. I'm the deputy of Marjolein van Delen, who sits just in front of me. So given the title of this panel, the EU's role in non-proliferation and disarmament, I thought I would say some words about how we work within the EU on non-proliferation, disarmament and arms export control. So these matters are a long-standing priority within the European Union, and even already in the old security strategy, the EU's old security strategy of 2006, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction was listed as the first of the global challenges and key threats at that time. Now it's 16 years since then, and this year we adopted the EU's strategic compass in March to set out a plan of action for strengthening the EU's security and defense policy by 2030. And it clearly sets out the direction on these issues, stating that the EU shall uphold, support and further advance the disarmament, non-proliferation and arms control framework. Now, within the European Union, there is a multitude of actors and entities. I'm from the EAS, as I mentioned. There are various services within the European Commission which have their bits of the cake when it comes to non-proliferation and disarmament. We have the foreign policy instruments here. There's DG Energy. There are the joint research centers, DG Home, ECHO. We have our EU delegations in Geneva, Vienna, and New York. And of course, what would we do without our member states, our 27 member states? Because in the EU, non-proliferation, disarmament and arms export control is still mainly pure CFSP, Common Foreign and Security Policy, within the competence of EU member states. We therefore operate on the basis of unanimity, and the EU is strong when operating in unity, but we have to arrive there, and this requires all to work together. So what does the EU action in support of our multilateral order of non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms export control look like? Well, simplifying this, there are three layers. The first one, which we have been speaking a lot about today, is supporting, upholding, and strengthening the overall NPD architecture and our norm system. The second one is about supporting the work of multilateral institutions and actors. And the third one is about engaging with and dialoguing with and supporting third countries. A couple of words on each. So on the first, on the international non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. So as was mentioned by someone, multilateralism is deeply embedded in the EU's DNA and its overall foreign policy projection generally. And this is, of course, also the case when it comes to non-proliferation disarmament specifically. We are very active and consistent, taking principled positions in support of existing treaties and agreements And we do so in the whole range of fora, such as the NPD, the BTWC, Ottawa One Mine Ban Convention, CWC, Arms Trade Treaty, HCOC, MTCR, Wassenaar, just to mention a few. So this implies intense coordination within the EU circles, and we have various fora for this. It's mainly here in Brussels, in the working groups CONOP and COARM, but it's also in ongoing EU coordination in Vienna, Geneva, and New York. We agree on EU statements, to which a range of our CFSP partners normally align. We develop joint papers, we do joint lines to takes, we engage with joint rights to reply. Second, as was already mentioned by my colleague from FPI, the EU supports the work of multilateral institutions and international actors. So many of the NPD treaties are supported by organizations or secretariats. There's the IAEA, the OPCW, the CTBTO, ATT Secretariat, etc. And actually, the EU and its member states are main donors when it comes to the support of the architecture. As for the EU specifically, there is a dedicated line in the CFSP budget for action on non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms export control. And this is quite unique, actually, and not the case for other thematic CFSP areas. This support is crucial to underpin the EU's political and diplomatic action on these matters. So at present, we have some 30 projects running under implementation for an accumulated value of roughly 100 million euros, including with main international organizations like the IAEA and OPCW, in support of key instruments like the BTWC, where, for example, we have just financed the preparatory regional workshops in the run-up to the upcoming RevCon. And on thematic projects like iTrace, a flagship project, which helps providing data on transfers of conventional weapons, ammunitions, and related materials. We adopt around 10 new CFSP actions every year for a value about roughly 30 million euros. And we try to keep a balance between new, there is a couple of new ones every year, and consistently, most what we are doing, we have been doing for some time, and we keep engaged. We keep calm and carry on in our support with some of the projects that we have run for many years. So, for example, our action in support of CESAC on the SALV roadmap for the Western Balkans is our second oldest one and has been supported by the EU since 2004. So just as an exemplification, we have adopted a few during this year. The one on the Arms Trade Treaty was already mentioned, as was the action with UNODA in support of the program action on SALV. We have adopted a project with the OAS, Organization of American States, in support of efforts to combat SALV in the Americas. We have adapted our action with the IAEA to include actions to help Ukraine in ensuring the maintenance of its nuclear security regime. And we are in the process of adopting two fully new projects, which I'm not going to go into detail in, but in the area of emerging technologies, which we expect to be adopted by the Council within the next few weeks. And then there's a third layer, which is our engagement with third countries in support of our multilateral agenda. There are several aspects to this. So one is dedicated non-proliferation and disarmament dialogues, or arms export control dialogues, which we hold with like-minded countries like the US and with other third countries with more challenging positions like China and Cuba. And then there are a number of informal dialogues which we hold on an ad hoc basis. We also reach out and démarche when necessary third countries. This can be on specific issues, like, for example, most recently in the context of the particularly difficult issue of the First Committee, or it can be generally in support of universalization of various instruments. So, for example, earlier this year, we used the 20th anniversary of HCOC to démarche those who are not yet subscribing to the code in order for them to do so. And then finally, we support third countries' implementation of their commitments. No, of course, they are responsible for their commitments, but we can help. And examples of this is, for example, the action adopted earlier this year in support of the implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty to make arms trade more responsible. My FBI colleague mentioned the Centers of Excellence on CBRN prevention and preparedness. There is a program which is called EU Partner to Partner on export control programs that provides training. And we support capacity building in relation to Resolution 1540, which we implement through UNODA and the OSCE. So this was to give you a brief overview about how we work, and I will stop here, and many thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, and now can I turn to Sigurd, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Sigurd Schelsrath. I'm the Director of Non-Proliferation and Disarmament at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Belgium, Brussels. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I would also like to thank the public, the audience that is still here after already a long day with interesting discussions. As previous speakers have shown, there is quite a lot of beef in the EU's approach to non-proliferation and disarmament, and I would like to talk more about the focus I believe the EU should take. I will talk about the focus, the challenges surrounding it, and also opportunities. Or in short, I will argue that the EU needs to focus much more on conventional disarmament. I will acknowledge that Ukraine is the main challenge, no surprises here, and I will identify new technology as our opportunity. So regarding the focus, it is my belief that the European Union and its member states spend too much focus on, not too much, they spend not enough focus on conventional disarmament and arms control, in favor of the weapons of mass destruction. If you look at two major meetings that took place over the summer in New York, there was one, the biannual meeting of states of the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, and you had the NPD review conference. The engagement, the commitment, and the active participation of EU member states was much larger at the at the NPT review conference. It was very good, obviously, but we would have wished to see the same kind of interactive action and activity by EU member states in the meeting of the UNPOA. Another example that I can give is it's more of an issue of internal procedure. It strikes me that we have two strategies at the EU level, the strategy on the fight against the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and we have the strategy on small arms and light weapons. Now, the first strategy, we have 6 monthly reports on the implementation of this strategy. On this small arms and light weapons strategy, we don't have that. We, in fact, don't have any specific mechanism to look at how we are implementing this strategy. Now, do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that a 6 monthly report is the best way in looking and reviewing action taken under to implement the strategy, but there is an issue of do we have enough follow-up? So we spent quite a bit of time on weapons of mass destruction, while small arms and light weapons are the real mass killers, as we can see from day to day. And in this world, which is more complicated, where the attention has to be dispersed over many themes, it is also important to show what disarmament and arms control's value are. And in that respect, we welcomed very much the idea in the UN Secretary General's disarmament agenda of 2018 on disarmament that saves lives. This is the kind of concept that we have to cherish, we have to make the case, because otherwise attention will be less forthcoming. Now, I'm not naive. I know, of course, that nuclear issues are the ones that are taking up much of political attention. That's true also on a national political level. There is a political reasoning for it. But still, there are also opportunities that we have to see and seize these opportunities. Now, the biggest challenge, of course, is Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine requires, of course, our focused attention and trying to help Ukraine restore its national sovereignty and territorial integrity in full. But there are, of course, also implications on the longer term. And in this regard, some ideas have already been discussed, notably in the previous panel, and I very much welcomed the briefing given by Elias, because this was also a point I wanted to make. There is a lot of military aid being sent now to Ukraine, and the situation will change. There will be either a resolution of the conflict or a stalemate, but in any case, our countries are going to take up responsibility if arms that were delivered during nowadays turn up in the illicit markets or turn up in the hands of terrorists and so on. So it's really a very challenging issue where we have to look, and especially small arms and light weapons are prone to diversion, not the bigger systems. So we really need to focus on that. And why not think outside of the box and think of how we can improve concepts that we know and that we already have implemented, like the PSSM, the physical security measures, and post-shipment control, for instance. There is quite a bit of reflection done on the issue of how do you control after you ship weapons. Can we also look at that from an EU angle? Is there an interest? Is there a valid point to be made to look at EU's having a role in that? And then I would also say that we heard about the anti-personnel mines in Ukraine that are being used. In fact, while the Ottawa Convention has made quite a lot of progress, we also see now in Ukraine the use of new types of mines. So we have to tackle this issue and also use this situation to again sensitize international community and campaign for universalization of the Ottawa Convention. And finally, as concerns the opportunity that I see, the opportunity is new technology. And I wanted to raise that because we often see technology as the challenge and so on, and puts us before problems, but it's also a huge help. On small arms and light weapons, for instance, the EU has experience with an innovative approach in funding the conflict armament research NGO, which has put up an electronic portal for tracing arms. So this is something which we've done in the past. We can build upon this. We can look at how new computer vision technology can be used for automated tracing and identification of arms and ammunition. Or on the field of anti-personnel mines, drones are also used now for technical survey. And this is something where EU could also take a lead in supporting this kind of technology. And finally, of course, new technology is opening so many more pathways for verification. And in a world where there is no trust, only verification can bring results. And I will leave it at that, and I thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you. So let me turn to Heike then and ask you a question. We heard Izumi mention a couple of the notable successes, including rules and norms on artificial intelligence and support to the BWC. What do you think the big successes for the EU are? What do you think the failures are for the EU in non-proliferation and disarmament?
Well, let me keep the best for last and start with activities where we could still see some significant improvement. One of them is that, for instance, despite the support and the dedication that we have to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran still continues with the uranium enrichment as of now. That, I think, is a good example or a bad example. Now, also, despite all of our support, and we have been giving quite a little bit of that, the Middle East Weapons of Mass Destruction Free Zone has not been established yet. So these are two significant examples where we simply didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. But when we turn to the successes, I believe that the most important success is our contribution to keeping the overall global non-proliferation architecture up and running, and allowing the key institutions, the key multilateral institutions doing their job, despite the current crisis caused by the Russian aggression. I think that is really a significant achievement that is sort of at the very top of the success stories. Now, two concrete success stories. One of them is the OPCW, where we have been facilitating the work of fact-finding missions and the declaration and assessment team in Syria, by providing them with satellite imagery for the inspection of facilities and sites involved in the Syrian chemical weapons program. The other success story that I would want to underline and highlight, and there I come to what the colleague just said earlier on, is the important work of the iTrace project. I have seen for myself on the ground in Iraq the good work that is being done by iTrace, which deploys expert teams to conflict zones around the world, including Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, in order to identify illicit conventional weapons, including weapons captured at the battlefield, and trace them back to the actual exporters. And you will be surprised when you go through a stock of weapons that have been confiscated, where those weapons actually come from. It's quite an interesting experience. With this, we can actually identify the supply chains of illicit conventional weapons and patterns of diversion. And yet again, this is then very, very helpful for everybody working in arms export control authorities. When it comes to giving the licensing decisions, they actually can take into consideration the reports that are being provided by iTrace on a regular basis. So for me, that and OPCW is certainly a success story.
Great. Any open up to the other panelists? Stefan, Sigurd, do you think, or Izumi, do you think of any other successes or failures, strengths or weaknesses?
So, thank you very much. So in terms of successes, strength, or failures, weaknesses, I would like to actually focus on the latter. I mean, strength and weaknesses. I think in terms of success stories, it's an ambitious word, but I very much agree with my FBI colleague that we have been very successful in holding together during the last year, notably during the last year, in support of the NPD architecture in particularly difficult circumstances. As I was speaking about the EU's role generally in non-proliferation, I continue along that vein. So I would just say that in terms of weaknesses and strength, I would basically see this as two sides of the same coin when it comes to the European Union, and it's related to the extraordinary complexity of the European Union, actually. And we cannot be compared to a state. Sometimes people do that. It is our member states who are members to the various treaties and organizations, and sometimes we have an observer status, and sometimes not even that. There is a multitude of actors, and sometimes it just gets very complex in the European Union, such on issues like salve or mines were mentioned here, with an array of actors, and then it has to go quickly, like in the case of Ukraine. It's not an easy task, actually. But then the flip side of that is when we actually get it lined up, we are actually quite good, I think, and we have resources available, both in money and in terms of manpower, and there is also formidable strength in our numbers because we are 27, and you add a range of aligning countries to that, and a range to like-minded. And we will actually have quite some impact on the international arena when we have done our necessary homework beforehand. So I think that I will stay at that. But for me, that's the strengths and weaknesses of the European Union on these issues. Thank you.
That's a great point. I recall when I was working on small arms light weapons at NATO, I wanted to find out all the EU projects related to small arms light weapons across all the offices, and I talked to the person in charge of coordinating, and he said he didn't know. So we actually built him an online tool. NATO built a tool for the EU to help track EU small arms light weapons projects, and it was really fantastic, and it gave a lot of insight as to how many organizations within the EU were doing just that one mission. Really is quite extraordinary. So do you have any strengths or weaknesses?
I think there's so much already said, so I'll just say two words. On strengths, we also have, there's some projects that were mentioned, but we have projects that are more on a strategic level, but also projects that are on a very, very concrete level. And for instance, I'm thinking about the issue we had in Libya a couple of years ago with the remainders of the chemical weapons program there. There were a couple of containers there with still highly toxic chemicals inside, which were leaking also, and there was also, of course, the issue of the security situation, possible loss of control of these containers, and then the European Union did this project to completely dismantle these containers. So it's very concrete and it's very useful, and it's maybe something which we haven't put enough light or enough publicity on. Weakness, I think, staying with projects, we do a lot of work on the mines. However, the EU still does not have a strategy on anti-personnel mines, on the fight against anti-personnel mines, which would be useful. And so that is a weakness that I would see.
Okay, great. I have a couple more questions, but that would be too self-indulgent because I need to get the audience involved. So I'll put a pause on the other questions. We'll come back to them if we have a little bit of time. But let me open up to the floor. Do you have any questions? There, we got a first hand over there. I'll collect a couple questions and then turn to the panelists. So please, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Louis. I'm a researcher at the Vienna Center for Disarmament, Non-Proliferation. Also, former trainee and still a fan of SecDefPol 4, so congratulations on your post. I wanted to ask two things. First of all, I think a lot of the organizations in the room and part of the consortium appreciate that it can be easier for the EU to give quite a lot of money rather than a few hundreds of thousands, a few tens of thousands in financial support to think tanks and so on. What could be done to change that? Because I'm sure there are quite a lot of ideas just in this room, that would benefit from smaller scale funding. And then the second thing I wanted to ask is, there's a fantastic paper released under the consortium written by my colleagues Ingrid Kirsten and Mara Zaka at the VCDMP about how to balance the 3 NPT pillars. And essentially they're promoting the idea of the EU financing peaceful uses, because with all the support for nuclear safety and security projects by the IAEA that the EU has given, it hasn't given to promoting peaceful users. So what do you think about the EAS consulting with INTPA about getting that integrated in EU development work? Thank you.
These are great questions. I saw another hand in the back of the room there.
Thank you. Thanks very much to the 4 panelists. My name is Laurie Neo. I'm a research assistant at CIPRI. And my question was whether another avenue for the EU to use to kind of take a bigger role in conventional and small arms controls couldn't be linked to the European Peace Facility, so the facility that was used in part to fund lethal military equipment sent to Ukraine, but that has a broader reach and that has been used to finance other non-military lethal equipment in other cases. Yeah, I think it could potentially have the potential to strengthen cooperation between the EU and its member states. And also on-site visits are mentioned as part of EPF assistance measures, so there could also be a potential perhaps for the EU to conduct post-shipment controls and especially on-site inspections. So I'd welcome your views on this. Thank you very much.
Those are 2 great questions, and I did have that question myself. Is there, I used to be an arms control inspector way back when, and one of the things I used to do was end-use monitoring inspections. Does the EU have capacities for end-use monitoring? But any of you, would you like to, for end-use monitoring, where you actually go and you inspect whether the weapons are being used the proper way, stored properly, and that. So can I turn to the panelists? Any responses to those 3 questions there? One on the EU, can you give less money? Although I've done the reporting requirements for EU grants, that's a tough one. And peaceful uses, and using the EU peace activity for conventional weapons, small arms weapons. Anyone want to jump in on any of them? Stefan, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, just talk.
So, yeah, just one word on the peaceful uses, actually, because...
Try again. No.
Here we go again?
There
yeah.
we go.
Okay, so I think in terms of balance, I think the whole EU's approach to the NPT is actually the balance between the 3 pillars, as that's a delicate balance, and that's the consensus between EU member states as was set up when we prepared for the 10th Revicon of the NPT and contained in the Council conclusions of last year on this. We have tried to pull together information about what we are doing on peaceful uses, and we did this in view of the Revcon actually. And if somewhere on the EAS's webpage there will be a pager which we have developed with the various services of the Commission about the many different aspects of EU work on peaceful uses. So of course we can become better, but there is a lot being done by the different agencies and parts of the European Union. So I invite you to find that. I don't know where to find that immediately myself, but it's somewhere on the EAS's webpage. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yes, maybe if I can take up the end-use monitoring. No, the European Union does not do that. It is an issue. It's more and more subject that has been debated, and that has there are only a few countries who do post-shipment verification of weapons that they deliver, that they sell. Germany is one of them, but it's more and more being discussed. And that's also the point I wanted to make during my presentation is, can we think out of the box, and can we think of a possible EU role, for instance, in Ukraine?
Yes, if I may, just adding something on the grants. In principle, whoever is benefiting from a EU grant needs to actually have the relevant predispositions. You cannot just give grants to just anybody. They need to have the relevant administrative and financial structures, otherwise this is not possible. I think one of the grants we are actually providing is for Safer World. But as I said, you need to have and you need to fulfill certain preconditions as a small activity to be able to obtain any grants from the EU. That is one thing. I think there was a question on European Peace Facility. Now, the European Peace Facility, as I said, is a fairly new instrument that developed on the basis of the African Peace Facility. It was extended very recently under the new multi-financial framework to cover not only the entire world, moving beyond Africa and covering the entire world, to also covering lethal equipment. And what we have seen since Ukraine's war of aggression is that the European Peace Facility has actually done incredible work and has provided, I think I can say, billions of funds to Ukraine via a system that allows weapons from member states to go to Ukraine. So I think you need to differentiate the purpose of the European Peace Facility, which is focused A, on training, B, on providing equipment, and C, on providing lethal equipment. So that is, for instance, something completely different than we are doing with our support for the projects that my colleague has mentioned. This money that we are using for the projects that have been mentioned, and also for the projects that I have highlighted in my own intervention, comes from the European CFSP budget. Now you also have to differentiate between the peace facility, which is being financed by state contributions, member state contributions, and the actual EU budget. There's a big difference between the two, because the CFSP budget can only finance objectives with a civil nature, whereas the peace facility can also finance military purposes. I think that is sufficient for the time being. I'm happy to reply to any questions in the margins afterwards. Thanks.
And I would just say also to Louis from VCD and NDP, as a member in the consortia, there's always a possibility for funding for papers and for ad hoc workshops. So if you have ideas, please talk to us. We're always open to those ideas. Let me see if I can bring in Izumi. Izumi, you heard a call for perhaps more work or more focus on the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Also, in your intervention, you mentioned a lot of the work that you thought that the EU had done very, very well. But if you could prioritize, if you could advise the EU on some focus areas to work on in the immediate future, what would you, to you, what is the most important thing that they can do? Izumi, what do you think?
Yes, thank you very much for these very interesting exchanges. And I wanted to also thank you for highlighting the small arms and the light weapons angle, I agree with you. I think it should be discussed and focused much more. And especially since as we actually look to this, production of a new agenda for peace, and in the sort of international environment of division, especially in the context of a Security Council, it will be more and more difficult to deal with on the ground conflict situations, which highlights the importance of prevention, of course, but also more of a peace building support to be prioritized. And then EU has been a big actor in this. And with the successful a biannual conference in July, and as we go into the fourth RevCon 4, I think there are so much more that we could do together, and we are doing a lot together with the European Union. So that's definitely one of the priority areas where we would like to really focus. We would like you to focus as well. But this said, I hope I can talk about one additional, of course, priority, and that's in the area of nuclear weapons, of course. One immediate priority is, of course, risk reduction. And risk reduction could mean a lot of things, but I think there are things that EU can do, definitely, in terms of helping to develop, socialize, and implement transparency and confidence building measures. And that could be crisis communications, building better understandings, for example, nexus between nuclear weapons and new domains and technologies, and the blurring sort of a line between conventional and strategic weapons. And I say this because the European continent actually has a lot of wealth of experience and knowledge in building these confidence building measures. Of course, that is going back to the previous Cold War and how you actually came out of that, successfully addressing the nuclear issues. Of course, the new context is a very different one, but why not build on those expertise and experience that you have? So help us also build those, sort of a reduction of a nuclear risk coupled with confidence building measures. And then, of course, risk reduction, however, is not enough. And I think returning to a common path or agreed path towards the elimination, further reduction of nuclear weapons is a common interest of the international community. And there again, I think there are a lot of things that you can do, especially in the context of the NPT. It will have to remain a cornerstone, a central vehicle in this area. And we are going into a new review cycle. And as you know, there is a working group established on the strengthened review process. And there again, I really look to the European Union and its member states. As I said, I think European Union is unique because you have many different types of member states. Including nuclear weapon states, all the way from nuclear weapon state to a TPNW supporters. So I think there are a lot that you can do to help us. So if I could actually put all of those as a priority, it would be wonderful to partner up or further strengthen our partnership between the United Nations and the European Union.
Thank you very much. That's a great. Now, I want to end on time, so I'll take one last question. I promised you the one question, and then we'll go to the speakers for final remarks. But thank you, Izumi. That was exactly the answer I was looking for. Please, right here in the front row.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I have a question, especially about technology. Both the United Nations and the European Union, you've all underlined the role of emerging technologies. What initiative is in the pipeline to bring technology companies to a dialogue with these multilateral institutions, both the United Nations and the European Union? Thank you.
Okay, so any final remarks? And if you have an answer to that question as well, that would be great. Let's start with you, Heike, right here. Oh, Stefan, you? Yeah, go ahead. So the question is are there any initiatives to bring industry on emerging technology into the dialogue about controls and norms and rules? Does the EU have any specific outreach to industry?
Yeah, I think this is something that may be covered by parts of the European Commission, like for instance DG Grow. They may be looking into something like that. I cannot give you any example of that, but the way you have formulated the questions, it would be very much for this department of the European Commission that is looking into this kind of cooperation.
And any other things or any final remarks?
So in terms of final remarks, no, thank you very much for this discussion. I think we have discussed a number of pressing issues and on our agenda that the EU is working on. I mean, the most important of this is, of course, the maintenance of the international non-proliferation regime, which is under more stress than before. It was already under stress. We are working on this. Many others are also working on this. This is a joint effort between the European Union and member states, but also the broader community. And we will keep on engaged on these things. So I think that is my final point. Keep calm and carry on.
Any final?
Yes, maybe just one last point on EU and UN cooperation. I think we have a common interest, and the common interest is really to keep disarmament, arms control matters high on the agenda. And there is a need also to have, for instance, the EU member states to reach out to the UN at all levels to underline this fact and underline these matters, especially when we're thinking about the new agenda for peace, which is being set up right now. So I think that there's a real common interest there.
Well, that's great. And we have only to give thanks to our panelists, especially for Izumi, for being with us and being the physical representation of UN-EU cooperation. Thank you all very much, and can we give a big round of applause for everyone? Thank you very much. And now we'll get ready for the final session.
So we will have a very quick change of table and immediately start the next session, which will be devoted to the role of next generation in arms control and non-proliferation.
Good. So it's time to conclude the last session of this conference, the 11th edition of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Conference 2022. And may I just ask everybody in the back also to take your seats and to move outside if you're chatting. Thank you very much. So we decided at the consortium then that rather than just talk about the next generation, we would like to let the next generation talk. So we've decided to also include them in our concluding panel. So I will briefly introduce myself and then hand over to my fellow panelists. My name is Sibylle Bauer. I'm Director of Studies for Armament and Disarmament at SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. And today I'm speaking to you in my capacity as the current chair of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium. So the first speaker is Emily Faux. She's currently a PhD student, but she's also an alumni of our Young Women Next Generation Mentorship Program. So she was a part of that last year. And Tim Thies is a researcher with IFSH, which is the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy in Hamburg. And he was a speaker at the Next Generation workshop last year. So to all the mentees and next generation speakers from this year, watch out, because you may be asked to do concluding remarks next year or be pulled into the panels. And I should also say that one of the next gen speakers even stepped in today for a speaker who had fallen ill, who had been in this year's group. So we really have a fantastic group. So with that, I'll hand over to Emily.
Okay, thank you. I hope you don't mind. In true next generation fashion, I am going to read from my phone. The next generation has grown up fearing terrorism and climate change, not nuclear war. With the only military use of nuclear weapons 55 years before my birthday, it is easy to see how nuclear weapons had, until recently, become forgotten artifacts of a bygone era. It is thus unsurprising that some of the loudest voices in disarmament are of the oldest generations. One of the world's most famous voices in disarmament is 95-year-old William J. Perry. Perry served as the US Secretary of Defense under President Clinton. During his time in office, Perry witnessed the terrifying reality of nuclear launch systems. He recalls how nuclear weapons are vulnerable to terrorist attacks, accidents, computer system failures, and human error. The possibility of misjudgments, accidents, cyber attacks, and with it, the end of the world as we know it. Today, every nuclear weapon state is modernizing and/or expanding its nuclear arsenal, and tension between nuclear-armed adversaries threatens potential escalation of conflict to the nuclear arena. This may sound like I'm giving you a recount of impending doom, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because of the people in this room, and because of the conversations we've had over these past 2 days. Increasing general awareness about the insecurity of nuclear weapons is vital. Countering the all too often accepted narrative that nuclear weapons are necessary for security is fundamental to the future of humanity and the planet. Whether or not our future and the future of our future children is safe from nuclear war is in so many ways dependent on the future of nuclear disarmament. And that future is sitting in this room. I'm so grateful to the mentorship scheme for supporting young women in non-proliferation and disarmament. The insight and advice we gain from the relationship with our mentors is invaluable. But most importantly, at least for me, is that this scheme puts its money where its mouth is. Opportunities such as this would not have been possible for me without holistic financial support in terms of travel, accommodation, and expenses. There are too few examples of similar investment in young women, especially in the typically male-dominated fields of military and security studies. Through my mentor and fellow mentees, I have been connected with incredible women from around the world who share my commitment to a peaceful future and human security. Throughout my mentorship journey, I finally felt like my voice on global security issues counted. It was the first time that being a young woman did not feel like a reason to stay silent in the world of weapons and war, but a reason to speak loudly and to make sure I was heard. It helped me, as a 21-year-old who was passionate about issues that felt far too big for her, to understand that I had knowledge that mattered and opinions that were important. With the recognition, encouragement, and support of the community we have all made here, I know that this year's cohort of mentees will also find their passion and self-determination to go on to share their voice with others around the world. The mentees I have met this week have interests that span from non-proliferation law to cybersecurity to environmental studies and development studies. They recognize the vast and intersecting landscape of the pursuit of peace. They are committed, and I don't mean committed to career progression or some high sought-after position of power, but I mean committed by a deep compassion and a hope for a better future. Thank you once again to the Vienna Center and the IAI for supporting young women in non-proliferation and disarmament, and thank you to all the mentors who willingly give up their time to support the next generation.
And now over to you, Tim. Sure, you choose.
All right, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and also thank you for the organizers, for the Istituto Affari Internazionali, the consortium, for organizing this conference. And it's really, after 3 years of conferences and meetings on computer screens, I was really happy to see so many familiar faces and the less familiar faces to the really familiar names here in person. I'm also very honored for this opportunity to say a few words on the next generation in front of such a distinguished audience here today. And I have to admit, it's a bit of a daunting task to me, because after all, I've only entered this field a few years ago, and many in the room today have dedicated decades of their professional lives to the causes of arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. So in preparing my remarks, I asked myself, what meaningful contribution could I make to this event? And one could argue that on a conceptual level, many of the solutions to the problems that we are facing in our field already exist. And so we simply have to relearn and reapply the lessons from the past. Now, if solving the arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation challenges is only a matter of political will and not of intellectual work, why do we even need all these initiatives for the next generation? As someone fairly new in the field, I often thought that I had come across a fascinating new research topic, only to find out that someone back in the 1970s had already worked on this exact question. So whether it's the crisis of arms control, critiques on the concept of deterrence, proliferation cascades, or the linkage of arms control to other issues, older senior scholars would be forgiven for thinking that the debates in our field are a broken record. And younger scholars might write entire dissertations only on the reoccurrence of the same debates in our field over and over again. So, of course, reading the fundamentals, knowing which solutions have been put forward and to what results is, of course, a necessary condition to advance thinking in our field. But there are 3 reasons why initiatives to support and promote rising scholars are not only nice to have, but actually crucial for the success of arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. First, and most obviously, I think we simply need young people in this field to make sure that we can retain the expertise on these topics for 10, 20, 30 years from now. And some scholars have coined the current era the 3rd nuclear age. If history is any indication, this won't be the last nuclear age. And as much as I hope for rapid and radical progress on disarmament, it's also upon the senior scholars to ensure that we will still have a rich pool of experts to deal with these challenges in the future. Second, the technological landscape creates demand for new technical expertise. It provides an opportunity for emerging experts on things like cyber, AI, or quantum to enter the arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament field. But it also demands that the field becomes more inclusive and more attractive to young people, rising scholars from a broader range of disciplines. So entering the field can be challenging in itself, but it can be equally challenging to stay in the field, especially if your skills and expertise are just as wanted in the private sector and often better paid. And third, and most importantly, we must bring greater diversity to the field, to the table, and we must allow new voices to come up with better ideas for all. Nuclear weapon states have developed and tested their nuclear arsenals on the backs of marginalized populations, whether it was in the uranium mines in Nevada and the test sites on the Marshall Islands, the Kazakh steppe, or the Algerian desert. I think from today's perspective, the neglect for the health of those affected is simply harrowing. But it's also a reminder that decision makers, even with the best intentions, can make horrible choices. And it should help us to reflect on the blind spots in our own research agendas. So going forward, we must put up safeguards against the fallacy of groupthink and not get too comfortable in our echo chambers. Finally, the war in Ukraine also exposed the fundamental injustice of the nuclear order, where security for the few is created at the expense of the many. So it's upon our community to lay the intellectual groundwork for how to build back a better, more just, more robust nuclear order. And to do this, our field has to become more diverse, and it takes the right funding to make sure that your chances of succeeding in the field don't depend on whether you can afford, for example, unpaid internships. And in this regard, I want to commend the consortium for providing the funding for 30 internships in European think tanks until 2025. So for the continuity in the field, to adapt to technological change, and to ensure and to build back a better nuclear order, we should all strive to ensure that all those rising voices with passion and innovative ideas get a seat at the table, have their voices heard, and can weigh in on the path forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Tim. When Emily spoke, she said that she was optimistic because of the people in this room and because of the conversations that she's had. And I'd like to add that I'm optimistic because of people like the two of you. Very bright people who are committed to this issue, who would like to take things forward and who are willing to speak out and to be engaged and to get a seat at the table. And I think that's really wonderful, and that is what we need. So in speaking about next generation, I would like to actually agree with something that a colleague said from the External Action Service yesterday when concluding the Next Generation meeting. He said, next generation is also a state of mind. It's not only about age. So it means that it's also a call to all of us to be open to new ideas, open to fresh ideas, to unorthodox solutions, to think outside the box, or to create new boxes in terms of conceptual boxes, institutional boxes, and also the language and the concepts that we need. We've already heard a bit about diversity of generations, so even though it's not about age, it's also about age, and we have come a long way. Like Dipti from the CTBTO said yesterday, this room is not the room that we would have walked into 20 years ago. And I should add, also not 10 years ago, and I think also not 5 years ago. I remember when we organized the conference, maybe about 5 years ago, we made a really big effort to get gender balance of speakers, and we were proud we got gender balance of speakers. And then we looked at the participants list, and the majority of EU member states had sent male delegates, and the majority of think tank members had also sent male delegates. So the point that I want to make, it's not just about chairs and speakers, and I know that we've gotten a lot better about that. It's also about the participants. It's about who asks the questions. It's about who takes up speaking space. It's about who's speaking and who's listening and who's heard. So the concept of diversity is really much, much broader. But I'd like to get back to the good news because, as Jelena said, we need good news. So the good news is that we have actually come a long way in this, and the composition in this room shows it, and I hope that it's a reflection not just of this effort. I really hope that it's a reflection of where we've gotten to more broadly in this field. And when I say that we need good news, it's something that also, I was thinking back of the concluding remarks that I've done at the last few conferences. And it was always about the crisis of arms control, the crisis of disarmament, non-proliferation. It always ended on sort of a negative hope, a negative note with some optimism in it. So we have to make very much a joint effort to get out of this downward spiral that we seem to be in. And when I say being optimistic and being positive, I don't mean some fake positivism by ignoring the problem. But what I'm talking about is not being hypnotized by the problem, because if we do that and don't switch into problem-solving mode, we may miss the opportunities that do always present themselves. I'm sure, I mean, that's a very simple example from daily life, but when you've missed an exit at the motorway and you get annoyed about it, you'll also miss the second one. So it's really about making sure that when you've realized something, then you seize the opportunity to correct it. And I think that if we are too focused on the problem, once we've analyzed it, we may not take the time to think deeply enough, to engage enough, to listen enough, and to move forward. As has been said, never waste a good crisis. It's been sad, but also interesting to see at the end of February how everybody stopped to think. Researchers, officials, when you ask people, everybody who had 5 billion recommendations ready from their pocket, everybody says, I'm thinking. So it's also an opportunity for self-reflection, an opportunity to question assumptions, to wonder if what we've always thought was true and right is the way forward, to ask the big questions. And that's something that I've seen at the Next 10 conference, when some of the very big questions yesterday were asked in the morning session. And there were not just good questions that were asked, but people also had some really good suggestions for the way forward. So what I think we really need to continue to do is to make sure that next-gen speakers are not just in a separate session, but that they are pulled more and more into the main conference, and that also all of you are invited to the next-gen workshop, so you can all listen in. At the end of the workshop yesterday, somebody said, it was such a high standard of the contributions and of the debate that he was hoping that at the main conference the standard would be equally high in terms of content per minute of conversation. And I think we've done fine, but I think it's really important to keep in mind that the quality of the contribution is not a question of age. The last point I'd like to make is about trust. And that was also something that was referred to in earlier sessions. It's partly trust between people, but it's also trust in data, trust in information, and trust in an analysis. And for me, especially in this age of misinformation and disinformation, it very much highlights the value of independent research. And this is what this network of independent non-proliferation and disarmament think tanks is all about. We now have over 100 members in this network, not just from all EU member states, but also from a range of other European countries, including Ukraine, which we are very happy about. So what we've highlighted in this network is also the value of critical thinking and nurturing education, which is one of the ways to address misinformation and disinformation. And I would like to draw all of your attention to a new section that was created on our consortium website, which is dedicated to teaching resources. Because we've realized that the subject of non-proliferation arms control is not taught very widely, and when it is taught, not in very diverse ways. So we want to encourage broader teaching of these subjects and also more diverse teaching of them. With that, I'd also like to thank the EU for valuing independent research and for funding this consortium, the conference, the network, and all of our activities. I've said it many times, but I can't say it enough. It cannot be taken for granted that 27 EU member states value independent research. It's really, really important. And the valuing of the different perspectives and getting us together here to do that. One of the difference of perspectives is actually not just regarding gender and age and geography, where I think we've come quite a long way. It's also about disciplines. And out of curiosity, how many here in the room have a natural science background? Okay. So there are a few, but I think we can do better. And I'd also like to reinforce Tim's point that he made about the diversity of disciplines. So not just political science, not just IR, and not just law, and maybe one or two technical disciplines, but really the broad range that we need to engage successfully and find solutions for all the issues and the problems. So with that, I thank the EU for making this possible and for their very generous funding and support for our activities. I'd like to also thank you all for coming here in person. This conference would not be the same if you hadn't come here in person. I'm really tired of just staring at screens, and I was really happy to meet many people here that I'd only met in Zoom calls before, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you. I'd also like to thank the other fellow consortium members who've been very actively engaged as speakers, as chairs, the other colleagues from CIPRI, from FRS, from IISS Europe, from VCDNP, and from the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt. And of course, the biggest thanks goes to those who've been in charge of the logistics of the conference. I know that it has kept them very busy. They've worked very hard. They'll be very happy when this is over this evening, I can promise you. So that's Ettore and Manuel. So let's please give them a round of applause. And of course, it's not just the two of them, but it's the whole team around them that has been supporting them. So many, many, many thanks. So with that, enjoy the dinner when it's ready, and also enjoy Brussels. The advantage of this venue is that we're actually in the middle of the center, so you can just go out to the Grand Place and explore a little bit. So with that, the conference is concluded, and look forward to seeing hopefully all of you at the conference next year. Thank you.